I'm going to be moderating the session. My name is Pav Jimanov. I'm a Docker captain. I'm happy to present to you Nathan Coberly. He's basically head of architecture at Physicians Mutual in Omaha, Nebraska. He's going to be sharing his story around Docker modernization and the journey that undertook with Docker. And just one note that Nathan is somewhat time sensitive. He had to run to the plane after this. So we're going to limit our Q&As to a few questions. They have some cards, so feel free to get in touch with him at a later time. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. So Nathan Coberly, Physicians Mutual Insurance. We're located in Omaha, Nebraska. Physicians Mutual, we sell life, health, and retirement insurance products. We have about 1,000 employees, about another 700 field agents in 26 states, $3 billion in assets. We're considered a mid-size insurance carrier, insurance company. But of note is that we've been in business 117 years. So we've been around a while, and we certainly have a lot of technology that has evolved over time. And so we'll be talking about that journey, about how our architecture has evolved and how Docker Enterprise has come to play a key role in that. A little bit more about me. Happily married, 4 kids. Of interest is, it might look like we're a very musical family, and we are, but 2 years ago, I would have told you I don't have a musical bone in my body. Not one. The only thing I could play would be a radio by turning it on. But my kids, they kept talking to me. They said, Dad, you should play something. You can do it. I thought, I don't know. But I had an opportunity through a very kind lady at work who showed me how to, got me started playing. And then, it really hit a great moment when I could sit down and play a song with my kids. It was really cool. I'm not a young guy, but you never have to stop learning. And certainly at Physicians Mutual, we haven't stopped learning. We are very much a mainframe-based company. Centralized computing goes back quite a ways for us. A lot of paper. Not so much typewriters anymore. We did finally, move away from that. But we still have paper. We still have mainframe. But we have certainly evolved a lot of things and have started to have really made a growth in leaps and bounds in terms of our technology. So if I look back, in the 90s, we started to have what you would typically expect. Java applications spinning up, VB applications spinning up, usually on a departmental basis for specific needs. But it was about 2006 that we really started to look at enterprise computing. And so when we started looking at enterprise computing, Java at the time was a natural fit. And so we started to get into using WebSphere application server and then trying to manage all the dependencies and everything that go with us. Very early on, and for us, I should mention that we have 4 different policy administration systems. And so we have all these shared back office assets that all of our client applications, anything from billing to our general ledger to customer service to customer self-service on the web, agent tools, all these things need to get at the same data. And so to avoid point-to-point integrations across everything and have to maintain all that, the idea of a service-oriented architecture made a lot of sense, right? Services that those things can call, we can decouple all those client needs from the back end. That's great in theory. And so, we continue to evolve. We got this idea of an ESB and started to try to move everything to SOAP-based web services, added more and more applications, but we were doing it in such a way that our dependencies were growing and growing. We finally moved from shared kind of project directories and at least started automating, builds with Ant, but a lot of times it was just project dependencies, and so we weren't really managing that very well. And it was starting to slow us down, quite frankly. SOAP was an interesting endeavor for us. The whole idea is it's a platform-independent way to call a service, right? Except that we found that almost every vendor had their own flavor of it. They would ask, well, did you use Apache Access for that, or was that more RPC-based? Because, we really work with this or that. The IBM products wanted to be able to import DTD definitions, and other products needed to have the WSDL fully contained. And so we ended up doing very specialized SOAP services that were, frankly, a little bit customized for the tool or the endpoint that was calling it. And a lot of times it was just Java anyway, so then you just do RMI. And so our whole idea, we had a good idea, but really the technology at the time wasn't well suited for what we were trying to do. And again, we started to slow down more and more as a result of the dependencies. Finally, you fast forward to 2017, and we finally started to get a better handle on this. You know, we brought in Gradle and Nexus to better manage our jars. We started to separate things out in the JVMs and try to tune those for different types of applications. But frankly, it was just too little, too late. The dependencies, all of the dependencies that were getting into this were forcing us into quarterly builds. And that was about all the faster we could deliver value to the business. And that's not fast enough. As a mid-sized insurance carrier, the whole point is we need to get products to market quickly. That's our competitive advantage. Find what the bigger insurers aren't going after and then get after it faster than our competitors. So we were in a place where we had very tight coupling. We had a one-size-fits-all application server. See, it had to host all of those applications, which means it was really not tuned for any one of them in particular. I already talked about web services and their interoperability. That didn't pan out too well for us. We ended up with a very monolithic architecture. If our applications were monoliths, then our architecture was a monolith of monoliths. We were in dependency hell. And we needed to chart a different course. We needed to have a lightweight, open, RESTful API, a corporate API to our shared back office assets. We wanted to use open technologies and be vendor independent and not be strapped with the licensing costs that come with some of the technologies that we were using, especially if you go to scale them. We needed to manage our dependencies better, and we really seen a way to do that with domain-driven design. A book by the same title by Eric Evans talks about how to look at the business and how to see the natural fault lines in your services and in your data. And it gave us a way to rationalize how we looked at our business and create better separation so as to minimize the tight coupling and dependencies. We needed to be able to not have to have everybody join hands at once, because this all really came to a crescendo with Java 8. So when it came time to upgrade to Java 8, which, by the way, we put off to the last possible minute, I had to go tell the business that this quarter, we are not going to be able to deliver any business functionality because I have to have all of my teams lock hands and upgrade and be compatible to WebSphere 9 and Java 8, and we all have to do it at once because we're all in the same boat. No business functionality this release. So we needed versioning. We need to be able to have a newer version out there while others remained on an older version so we all don't have to lock hands. We need to do things differently. So we made the decision that, okay, we're going to do this. Now, when we're looking at re-architecting, looking at microservices, looking at containerization, so that we have some of what I had laid out previously there's a couple ways to do it. You can just sort of chip away at it, right? You can incrementally just kind of do this, do that, do this, do that. But time's the enemy here. I mean, the longer you take, the less likely you are to be successful at it. The more likely other things are going to come up and disrupt you. You could go big bang, but wow, to go big bang with something like that, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and they're legitimate questions. How are you going to do change management? How are you going to manage, how is operations going to manage the environment? How is this going to work? And folks need to know the answers to those questions. You can't just move forward without having all those things nailed down. And so what we ended up doing is really the best analogy I can think of is like a boxer. We went small, then we went big. It's kind of like a boxer's there. He might throw a quick left jab, but then he follows up with this big right hook, right? So quick jab and then follow through with the right hook. So go small, do a small but meaningful pilot was our approach, to answer those questions and get a working understanding of what we were going to do, and then follow through with something that's critical, right? With a big launch of critical things to really start moving and get the energy you need to move forward. So we started with our pilot. That's how we began this change effort. So we launched 7 full stack applications, and this was an opportunity for us to play with some different technologies. So we were on IBM's WebSphere. We shifted over to Liberty. It was a little more container-friendly, microservice-friendly. We played with JBoss, did some Node.js. So we tried some different stacks out in this process. But one of the gems that we found in this process was Nginx. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but Nginx really gave us the ability to do what we wanted to do. We were in Docker Community Edition at the time. That's what we did our pilot on, was Docker Community Edition. And so we set up a small cluster and began to build and launch these applications. Well, we wanted to do context route-based routing. We wanted to control things at that level, and Community Edition, you didn't really have any options, so we needed to bring our own in, and that's where Nginx really fit the bill well. Did a great job for us. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So you go through this process, and you start to learn, how are you going to do a CI/CD pipeline? How are you going to manage change? How are you going to scale this out with replicas and services? How are we going to administer it? We start to get answers to those questions. Okay, so we had the pilot. Now it's time to launch. Now it's the big right hook. So launching and sustaining a change effort like this that spans many teams, the enterprise, many business units, it takes a lot to consider in how you're going to do that, and how do you maintain and keep that momentum. So some of the things that came into play for us was really, you need to look at what's in it for, everyone's going to ask the same fundamental question: what's in it for me? They won't ask it out loud, but the fact is, you need to be able to answer that question. So in an effort like this, you have stakeholders, and my definition of a stakeholder is anybody who has the power to cause the project to fail. Well, that's a lot of people now. That's developers, that's system administrators, that's the business, sure, it's management. So you've got all of these stakeholders, and you need to be able to answer the question, what's in it for me? To them, what's in it for them? And so, you look at this, and change is scary. Folks are comfortable with what they're doing, but yet you've still got some folks there that really want to learn and grow as engineers and technicians. And so those are the people you start to find out. When you look at change management, for example, our change management, bundling big quarterly releases, managing all that change, keeping track of it all, and then doing this big delivery every quarter, that's pretty laborious. It takes a whole weekend to deliver it. You got nights involved. Well, what if I could do a daytime deployment? That's interesting. Our change management would like not to have to stay up at night or come in on the weekend. What if I could incrementally deliver small manageable pieces that can be readily tested, and I can see what I'm moving, and I can deploy that during the day without the business even knowing it until they see the new functionality? Now that's interesting. Change management's interested in that, right? Developers, this is interesting. Even in the development staff, I had my holdouts. I had folks that, they were comfortable in WebSphere. They've been doing it a long time. They're okay, right? And, you bring up Docker, and so Docker and containerizing things, well, it's cool, but what I found out from my developers is, as we started to talk through this change, and I really started to pick up on an enthusiasm gap there. And it was because fundamentally, that mess that I showed you earlier, nobody wanted to containerize that. Nobody wanted to put lipstick on the pig. Nobody wanted to just bring that mess into containers. I know you've probably sat through a lot of sessions on modernization and just containerize what you got. And if you're happy with what you have, by all means, do that, but we weren't. And so we didn't want to just bring that mess in. We really wanted to re-engineer this. Another aspect that I got from my developers is I had a pretty strong contingent of them through other places that have worked with Spring, Java Spring framework. And they really liked it. And it worked really well in their previous experience, and they really wanted to be able to use Spring with what we built. Okay, great. So now I can look at this and I can say, wait, well, we need to re-engineer this anyway. We need to do some things different. What if we move away from Java EE and go over to Spring as part of this and containerize those services and re-architect them like that as we think through our dependencies, follow domain-driven design, and really reimagine this? Now they're on board. Now they're excited. Now they got a great future to work towards. They're happy with that. That's what's in it for them. Operations want to learn and grow too, and containers and microservices are the future. And so you find those administrators, those operations people that want to go on that journey with you, and you have that coalition of the willing, and you keep that going. And then from there, one thing that worked really well for us is we created very intentional collaboration. We called it lab hours. So at 3 o'clock, almost every day, we had all the folks that were working on this re-engineering effort. They could get together, they bring their laptops, they could show off what they had done. Hey, I figured out how to do metrics with Prometheus and Grafana. I've got that going. Check this out, guys. Look at this dashboard. Another one would pull in, hey, I've got Spring Security figured out with our security model. This is working great. And they would bounce off each other. It created a great effect where, frankly, folks were coming in and they would present something. And if I'm a senior developer and I present something really cool and we're all talking about that and celebrating it, how do you think that next senior developer over here feels? They're going to feel a little bit of pressure to deliver too, won't they? Don't they want to present something and you know, kind of get some of that attention too? There's a fear of missing out. They don't want to miss out on what's happening. And so it creates a very positive kind of competitive effect among developers. And then they're, you know, in a way trying to one-up each other, or at least try to keep up with their peers. And then you got your outsiders that are on the edge that, you know, were kind of sitting there, and all of a sudden now they've got a little bit of fear of missing out on all this. Now they want to get on board too. So you start with that coalition of the willing. You create this environment where they're bouncing off each other, showing off what they got, celebrate those, talk through them, and then let that kind of ripple through the development organization. Invite everybody else, invite change management, invite operations. Let everybody participate in this and be part of it. It generates buy-in. And it worked for us. It worked very, very well. When you talk to the business, you need to simplify the complex. You can't, Docker, containers, that's all very difficult for a lot of senior managers to get, but you need to go at it in a way that they can understand. So you talk to them and say, hey, you know that application we built for you? You know, that application, I take that application, well, that's great, that application, but then I have to have an application server to run it on, and then I need all the configuration for that application server. I need all of the file system dependencies and operating system. I got all this stuff I have to manage. What if I looked at all that complexity and I just took a picture of it, a snapshot, and capture an image, and I take that image of all that stuff and I put it into a library. And then once that image is in that library, I can, on demand, create multiple instances of that application on demand. What if I do have multiple instances? Then they can share the load, right? What if one goes down? Well, then the others will compensate, and the system will spin up a new one to replace it. The business understands that because they've been through outages. They know when our big WebSphere application server, one application ran it out of memory and took the whole thing down. They still remember that when they couldn't take calls in the call center. That's what you reference. That's what they'll appreciate. The resiliency of this type of architecture has great business value. Present it that way. In the end, it creates an environment where we have enhanced high availability, that we could do these daytime deployments, that I could do a deployment and then it would route traffic away to these other instances, and it would upgrade this one, and then once that one's back up, it starts taking traffic and rolls right to the next one, and then rolls right to the next one, so that there's zero downtime. Business will appreciate that. You mean I don't have to wait till next quarter? You mean I don't have to wait till tomorrow? I could have it now? Yeah, we can test it. If there's a problem, we'll roll it back. Another key thing in doing any effort like this is you need to have some expert guidance. Now, we learned a lot in our pilot, but the fact is none of us has ever done anything like this before. So we reached out to Capstone Consulting. Capstone has a direct relationship with Docker and access to their engineering staff, and had certified architects. And so they were a great partner for us to move this forward. Whoever that is for you, make sure they're qualified and they have the expertise you need. But you need to have somebody there with you. Outcomes. So we ended up launching our entire corporate API as a RESTful API. Is 22 stacks that consist of 38 services, about 122 containers. I actually think that's about doubled by now with the release we're getting ready to put in. Enhanced high availability, daytime deployments. An interesting note here is, honestly, I wondered, I thought people might be a little reluctant, that, they might be, well, we'll do it for this, but we're not going to do it for that. I was amazed how quickly everybody said, nope, I'm done doing the nighttime thing. Once they knew the daytime deployments worked, I could hardly keep them from doing daytime deployments. They much prefer to do that and get the thing off the docket, out of the way, into the business's hands, and on to the next thing. Across the board, that one took really well, and I was very pleased with that. Enhanced monitoring and troubleshooting. As I move on here in the presentation, I'm going to talk about specifically some of the frameworks we employed, but we definitely were able to achieve a level of monitoring and troubleshooting, log aggregation, that we didn't have with WebSphere. And then just simply consistency. The fact that I can promote an image through a pipeline, dev to QA to production, and I know it's the same thing because it's the same image that I promoted all the way through with the pipeline. So how did we do it? What did we use to do it? When we switched to the big implementation, the main thrust of what we did, we shifted over to Docker Enterprise. We're a financial services company. Docker Enterprise gave us some great ability to create the kind of separation that you need to have for separation of duties, ITIL. It allowed us to be able to give developers enough access to where they could troubleshoot, see logs, see what's going on, but then restrict access and again, have that separation of concern. Docker Trusted Registry allowed for multiple namespaces that we could promote the image through as it's eligible for the next step in the pipeline. And then it had image scanning, which we felt was an important way to be able to x-ray these images that we had and make sure that we had common vulnerability scanning going on and get that kind of feedback. And so those were all pieces that factored into our decision. But yes, with the main launch, we transitioned from Docker Community into Docker Enterprise, and it's worked very well for us. We went with the OpenJDK 8 on an Alpine image. That's our base. Nice, small image footprint. OpenJDK was a good natural transition for us, especially with Spring, and moving off of the IBM JDK. We implemented full log aggregation. We did that with the Elk Stack, Elasticsearch, Kibana, Logstash. In addition, we added Logspout. And that gave us the ability then, any stack or service or container that we run in the environment, its sysout, syserr is automatically aggregated into Elastic. And so you don't have to do any additional configuration or anything else. It takes any container you launch, sysout, syserr, brings it in. So our log appenders are pretty much all going to sysout and then right into log aggregation. Prometheus and Grafana. I can't say enough good about this. I mean, we really went to town here. I'm very proud of our dashboards. We ended up pulling in not just node and cluster statistics and pulling those into Prometheus. We also pulled in from Nginx metrics in. And in addition, with Java Spring, Spring has Spring actuators, and one of those was a Prometheus actuator to get JVM stats and pull that into Prometheus. So we pretty much had, soup to nuts, top to bottom metrics off of every layer of the stack going into Prometheus, and then just dashboarded the heck out of it, and it came out really good. So can't recommend that one enough. Jenkins has been a great friend in this process. All of this, by the way, is running also in that Docker cluster. Elastic, Prometheus, that's all running in containers. So is Jenkins. We just mounted the host socket, and it builds peer containers alongside it. And so I'll show a little bit more about that. And then again, Nginx. The main things there, even on Docker Enterprise, we didn't want to use subdomains. We wanted to use context root-based routing. In addition to that, we had a really slick way with Nginx updates. We had another containerized application listed for Docker events. Whenever an application is launched or changed, it updates the Nginx config in a shared volume. All the Nginx replicas, none of those restart, no updates roll. We just simply signal them to reload their config. And Nginx has a very nice command that will then spin up a new worker thread under the new configuration and quiesce the old one, 0 downtime. So that combined with Docker rolling updates gave us a great clean ability with no disruption and no service convergence to be able to do daytime deployments, and it worked like a champ. Another kind of view of some of what I've been talking about. Again, Alpine Linux-based, Java 8, some of the Spring frameworks that come into play. And this would be kind of a typical API policies. So again, going back to Eric Evans' domain-driven design, you really look for those natural fault lines around a principal concept, like an insurance policy. Yeah, there's coverages, there's riders, but those are really kind of wholly owned pieces of a policy, and so therefore they're covered under the same microservice. And so that's how we began to look at how we limited the tight cohesion between our services, which gives us the ability to then independently deploy them. Continued what we had with Gradle and Nexus, and again, our REST API, our corporate API to any of our shared back office assets. We call it the Physicians Mutual API, or PMAPI for short. Overall, at least the development side of the pipeline looks like this. So what we did is any developer working, when they do a push on their feature branch, we use GitLab Enterprise. Anytime there's a push to GitLab, that triggers a webhook to Jenkins. Jenkins runs the unit test. It does the application build. It does the Docker build, and it pushes that image into the Docker Trusted Registry. It then turns around into the next environment, or into the development environment in this case, and does a Docker stack deploy and spins up the application. Which means every time a developer pushes, there is an instance running that the team can look at, the business can look at and give them feedback. So every time they push with Git, they have an updated instance running out there for the team. It's kind of like a team-based test environment. But it's very ephemeral. They don't last long. In fact, if you don't push anything to it within 3 days, it cleans itself up. Think of it like disposable plates and plastic silverware versus the fine china. They're very ephemeral. They're just here as long as you need it. And then from there, we use tagging quite a bit. So one of the things that we felt very strongly about when it came to versioning is I don't want to have an image out here. I don't want to have version 2.0.0 of the policy API service. I don't want to have that version out there and not know the exact source code behind it, especially if in production I'm running both 1.0 and 2.0, or 2.0 and then 2.0.5. If I have a patch version out there, I need to be able to know what the source code is that corresponds to it so that I can troubleshoot. And so tagging created a very natural way using Git. So basically we would tag it. So we use semantic versioning, major, minor, patch, developer, actually the tech lead after accepting the merge request, and deeming that it's ready to enter the pipeline, tags it in Git. that triggers a webhook to Jenkins at that point, where it will then grab the image that corresponds to the repository that was just tagged. So now, and then it promotes that in DTR, giving it, say, 2.0.0, that will correspond exactly to the get tag 2.0.0. So I have a one-to-one association of my tags from source code to image. I did that with webhooks off of the get tag event. And then I promote it to the next namespace in DTR, and then we have another tool called Urban Code Deploy, which manages our pipeline phase gates, and it will then just pull from the registry and do a Docker stack deploy in the next environment up the chain. It's an example of a multi-feature branch where you're accumulating the contribution of multiple developers into something that we're going to release, and then we just tag it on that accumulating branch. Some of the references, again, I can't recommend this enough. This is really the seminal work in terms of thinking of what the grain for a microservice should be. If you're trying to minimize the dependency between your applications and not have them tightly coupled, you don't want to end up in a place where you're having to always deploy these same 2 or 3 services together. It's probably because you crossed that bounded context between them. Domain-driven design is the best work on looking at the grain of what your microservice should be. Absolutely, great book. We also, Adrian Mout wrote a book on using Docker. It's O'Reilly. In the early days of the pilot, this book made its rounds. It just got passed from desk to desk. And that really kind of gave us the primer. A lot of the concepts in there of running Jenkins in the cluster, of running all these, the elk stack in there. Some of those ideas came from Adrian in this book in terms of pretty much having everything that we needed for our architecture running in the architecture in Docker. So I went through a lot pretty quick. I do have time for a few questions.
Okay, given that, anyone?
Service discovery. So internally, when you do a stack deploy, the services are named stack, then service name. And so any reference to that within the environment's just using that. Outside of it, we have, again, Nginx was there. And so Nginx, we didn't do with context root-based routing. The Nginx config actually has all the context roots in it, so it knows how to route it to the service, right? Because all it's doing is then translating it to the internal service mesh name that Docker knows how to find. But to the outside world, it looks like, whatever, physiciansmutual.com /PMAPI /customers, for example, would be our customer API. And so then when that hits Nginx, it then resolves that to the internal service name, and then proxy passes it forward and then brings it back out through the proxy. So we really relied on the Docker Swarm. Incidentally, we use Docker Swarm for orchestration. Why Docker Swarm? Because it did everything we needed and it was simple. And we had enough of a learning curve with everything else. So, it continues to work very, very well for us. It's done everything we needed. But really just using Docker's mechanism combined with Nginx to help us address that very readily.
One more question here.
What kind of a financial impact or financial justification did you go through before you kicked that off?
It's a good question. I will be perfectly honest to say that I mostly approach this as an infrastructure project. So we are chartered with the business as stewards of this technology to keep these mission critical systems up and running and be able to deliver functionality quickly for the business. And we were beginning not to be able to do that. So really, the way I positioned this was more as an infrastructure upgrade to our applications and services, just being a good steward of our technology. And so that's how I approached it, as sort of a cost of doing business case if we truly want to be as nimble as we say we want to be.
I want to thank Nathan for the story, and Nathan left his card, so feel free to email him. I hope his email address is on it, and it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.